So good morning. I'm Hiten Samtani. I'm the associate publisher of The Real Deal, and we're here today with two of our top reporters, just bringing you the minute-to-minute coverage of everything that's going on. And I'd like to just chat with them about a couple of the big stories that have hit recently. Yesterday, EV Solomont had a story on Compass, and Compass is a venture-backed brokerage. Raised what? How much EV? How much are we talking overall?
1.5 billion is the total raise to date.
Right, and they're backed by SoftBank. They were the sort of the new kid on the block. They caused a big stir in the residential market when they popped up in 2012, 2013. And yesterday, as you know, potentially as a victim of the coronavirus fallout, they laid off 15% of their staff. So, Evie, can you talk a little bit about why that's such a big deal right now, and why Compass had become the firm that everyone was so obsessed with?
Well, I think you're asking a few different questions, but I think what happened yesterday was reflective of the economic fallout from the coronavirus. Across several industries, there are companies that just are going to see a drop in sales and an inability to pay workers, and as a result, you're seeing furloughs and layoffs just like across the economy.
Mm-hmm.
For Compass, they're taking stock of the housing market. The actual impact isn't really known yet because we're still in the month of March, but they're projecting a 50% drop in revenue. And so what they did was they made this proactive decision. That's what they said. It was a proactive decision to lay off staffers to kind of ride out whatever economic turmoil comes next. I think why it's significant for the residential brokerage industry in general is that Compass is this new kid on the block, and it raised a serious amount of money from venture capital firms.
We haven't seen in brokerage before, ever.
Never.
Right.
Unprecedented. They raised 1.5 billion at a valuation of 6.4 billion. A key backer is SoftBank, but there have been questions for years about whether their model is sustainable. A large reason that they grew, and the reason they grew so explosively, is because they had a huge war chest to spend to hire agents to open offices. So over the past few years, but certainly over the past few months in general, there have been increasing questions. Is this a model that's sustainable? Can it be profitable? Those questions sort of perked up in the fall after WeWork's botched IPO, but certainly amid the coronavirus pandemic, when any stable business that is profitable are going to be facing tough questions. Now you have a company, with questionable profitability, the stakes are just higher in terms of an ability to stay afloat financially.
I wonder just if the coronavirus pandemic is sort of a little bit of a red herring when it comes to Compass, right? Because there have been talks about layoffs there. Mass layoffs are coming at Compass for a long time. I wonder if this was just the trigger point, but this was in the works for a while. They had an IPO that would not have taken off after what happened with WeWork. There had been talks about an IPO then. I just wonder how much of this is pandemic related and how much of this is systemic to that company.
That's a really great question, because I think post WeWork, the landscape really looked different for Compass. They haven't talked about an IPO in a long time, at least for the past year. Their CEO, Robert Reffkin, has not been talking about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And in January, they laid off 40 staffers in IT and marketing, and they described that they build that as a reorganization of jobs to support agents. But anecdotally, agents and staffers there have been telling me for the past few weeks that there's this very big push toward profitability for the company. Last week, before the layoffs, Robert Reffkin sent an email to employees encouraging everyone to just basically tighten their belts, look at expenses. It was sort of a precursor of what to come, a little bit of foreshadowing. So I don't necessarily think that the Compass model would have there would not necessarily.
It's all right.
You got to edit that out. I don't think that the Compass model would necessarily need mass layoffs like this, but I think that there was writing on the wall for Compass. There was a need to tighten the belt and look at profitability, even if the pandemic hadn't happened.
Mm-hmm. And just what I'm wondering about is if this is a harbinger for what the other firms do as well. We had The Real Deal hosted the heads of the the other four big brokerages in New York, Elliman, Corcoran, Brown Harris, and Halstead. And there was an unequivocal, we're not looking at layoffs right now. We may have to make some decisions, but we're not at the moment. We're keeping things as they are. I wonder if they're just going to realize, just like the US realized, that this is bigger than they thought, and make some changes down the road.
I mean, I think it's inevitable. I think businesses across the United States, across the world, are going to have to cut back. I think for residential firms, you'll probably see it in terms of managers or marketing expenses. But I think that the biggest overhead item, the biggest biggest expense for them is going to be their offices. And I think over the past few years, there's been this move to reduce the office space. Residential brokerages don't need a retail space, on whatever main street they're on anymore. So I think you're going to see more of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see cuts in overhead that are related to space and back office stuff that can be shared.
Right. And so it's a fascinating story. And I think, as I said, I think it's a little fuzzy how much of this is pandemic and how much of this is just business operations. But Georgia, the stuff that you've been doing, this is Georgia Kromrei, one of our reporters in New York as well. The stuff that you've been doing has all been unprecedented in response to this giant pandemic. So one of the stories that you did yesterday was talking about a relief bill for renters and landlords, proposed by State Senator Michael Gianaris, also known as the Amazon Killer. That's probably his most well-known nickname. But he had talked about a bill that would provide some relief for 90 days. Can you talk a little bit about that and the implications of that, why it's important?
Yeah, so the bill that Gianaris proposed, it comes from an unexpected source for the real estate industry. He's definitely been an antagonist of the industry. He is credited with killing Amazon's HQ2 deal last year. So there's definitely a lot of suspicion from some in the real estate industry that he does intend to provide relief for landlords, but at least at first glance, the bill, it looks like it seeks to provide a rent waiver for tenants for 90 days if they're experiencing hardship because of the coronavirus. And it also would waive a proportional amount of mortgage payments for landlords during that period. So it doesn't actually differentiate between small landlords and big landlords. So when I asked Gianaris about this, he said that this would provide relief to any landlord in real estate. Just They have to prove that they have financial hardship.
And how does that happen? I mean, I think so. Most buildings are owned in individual LLCs, right? So the landlord might be able to prove hardship at one property in one company, but may be going back to a $50 million penthouse. And I think that seems like that would happen, right? Each building is controlled by its own company.
Right. So a lot of how that will be implemented, if the bill is passed, which it has not yet.
What's the temperature on the bill, in the sense that, does it seem like a thing that would happen, or?
Right. So a little bit unusual. The bill started out with already 12 co-sponsors. So that's quite a few. Usually a bill needs one co-sponsor and usually starts with only two, but it has 12 now, and is already in the Judiciary Committee. So it's already moving. But sessions have been canceled. Sessions were the legislature's session last week was canceled. This week it is in session, but they're doing a lot by video conference, by phone. So in many ways, a lot of things are being fast tracked. In other ways, there are some obstacles. But a lot of how a bill like this would get implemented will be determined after it gets passed, if it does pass, by the regulatory agency who would write regulations to execute the bill.
And historically, have those agencies been, landlords like those agencies typically? Like they'd see.
Sometimes they like them. Sometimes it's an opportunity to to weigh in outside of the public view. The agency, I believe, that would be writing the regulations for something like this bill would be the Department of Financial Services. The head of that agency is a close Cuomo ally. So Cuomo in the past has been a friend to the real estate industry, but that all changed last year when they had a spectacular falling out. So it kind of remains to be seen what would happen. But from the attorneys that I've talked to today, they are all poring over this bill to see if it indeed would provide relief for landlords, as the bill's sponsors have said they intend to do. So we'll see.
There's been some interesting rhetoric, I think, anyway, from the landlord community. We saw an op-ed from Jay Martin of CHIP yesterday, which he talked about how the landlord is merely a collection agent for the city, and shafting landlords or shortchanging them could be a disaster for the city long term. So I wonder where this is going. Just a quick, do you think at this point, there's enough on the table for renters who make up the majority of New York City's population? Do you think the bills proposed by either the city or the state are doing enough for the renters? Because April 1st is coming up. There's been this talk about how so many people would not be able to make rent this month. Do you think there's enough out there?
I mean, it's a good question. It's something that everyone is asking. Half of New York, not just New York City, but half of New York State are renters. Mm-hmm. And last week, Governor Cuomo was very quick to provide relief to homeowners in the form of forbearance for their mortgages and a halt to foreclosures. But very little really has been done for tenants, and besides halting evictions. So they can't be evicted for non-payment now, but it sort of places tenants
as well. You could not be evicted from a market rate unit as well at this point.
Right. So that's across the board. No evictions for non-payment. Market rate regulated doesn't matter. That's across the board in New York State now. But the question sort of puts tenants and landlords in an awkward boat together. And there's a bit of unease being in that same boat. There's a lot of suspicions from the real estate industry and a lot of misunderstanding, I would say, from the tenants. But they really are in the same situation of, on April 1st, they have bills to pay. Right. Landlords to their lenders and renters to their landlords. And if something doesn't change, it's going to be catastrophic on April 1st.
Right. And so what are you looking at next, DB? What's the next story in this? I mean, we don't predict the news, but what else are you looking at in sort of this when it comes to unemployment from the coronavirus or mass disruption based on this in brokerage? What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm actually thinking a lot about what Georgia was just saying in terms of April 1st. In the residential brokerage world, I think, the agents that are on the front lines at this point are probably rental agents. I think sales agents may have a little more wiggle room in terms of just like their immediate future. But I'm also wondering, like, what happens on April 1st? Will people need to move? Will agents need to show? Obviously, they can't, because Governor Cuomo was pretty specific about agents not doing open houses and not doing showings. But I think that things are going to change for a lot of New York City residents pretty soon as they need new places to live. And I'm also then on a kind of broader level, I'm interested in just the housing market, not the housing market, the job market. I think that the job numbers are really going to impact just the consumers and the customers, the buyers, the sellers, the renters, but then also the brokerage industry. And that'll obviously play a big part in what's happening in the housing market overall.
When Wall Street bonuses come out around this time? It's typically a great barometer for the residential market. They talk about it being the tail that wags the dog. But anyway, we'll get to that. Georgia, what's on your plate next? What are you looking at?
So I am looking at insurance claims, actually. So a lot of landlords and landlord attorneys were hoping that liability insurance for their buildings would allow them to, be covered in the event of a rent loss due to coronavirus. And it
an act
turns
of
out
God?
that,
That's the big thing, right? Is it considered an act of God? I've been really curious about this. Is it a force majeure?
yeah, so that's a great question, but landlords are definitely calling their insurers right now, and some of them are being successful and some are not. So so I'm trying to see what's going on with that.
In the residential sales market, there's a Corona clause.
Yep, we saw that.
It's everywhere. And I've been talking to brokers and brokerage heads who've said that for deals that are closing now, they're doing it remotely, but they're encouraging the new sellers to rent back the units to, or the buyers, the new owners to rent back the units to the seller because no one really can move, or there are questions about whether they can move.
Yeah, that happens, and it's fascinating because that happens in commercial buildings all the time. The sale leaseback is such a classic thing in the office market that it's interesting to see it happen now. So this has been an edition of, we haven't come up with a name yet, so bear with us, but we're basically going behind the journalism of the real deal. Things are moving so quickly, so we appreciate your readership, and we hope to bring you more of these. E.B. Solomont, Georgia Kromrei, thank you very much.